Tens of thousands representing scores of environmental groups in what was being billed as the biggest ever climate and nature march of its kind. In the crowd, royalty of one kind and another, and at the front, some genuine star power.
Our green and pleasant land is now turning into a bit of a disaster, frankly, and it's been so awful for so long, and this is the most extraordinary coming together of people and galvanising, particularly before an election, because if we don't act on this, we won't have a countryside anymore. It's as simple as that.
A call here for the restoration of nature in one of the world's most nature-depleted countries, where 1 in 6 species is threatened with extinction. Representations of wildlife, both born aloft and inhabited.
I'm a diver, and puffins are suffering enormously from overfishing of their food stocks, so they're in real trouble. And seabirds across this country and the world have really suffered.
For young people such as myself, it's very much our future, as well as other people's future, but certainly ours, yeah.
What exactly are you representing today?
I am the green man. I don't represent him. I am the green man, the male spirit of nature. And he's here to make sure that everything is fruitful and happy.
This event was longer in the planning than the surprise election. Those involved, like the RSPB with its 1.2 million members, hoping the coincidental timing can shift the tenor of the campaign.
We've had recent research that shows if nature continues to decline at the rate it is doing now, which is really fast, then we could lose 12% of GDP in the next decade. So, you know, it underpins everything, underpins the food we eat. It's our best ally in trying to address the climate crisis. You know, it's fundamental, and we're just not seeing enough of it in the campaigning that's going on.
It's not that climate and environment have been entirely absent. The Conservatives are pushing a slowed path to net zero, prioritising what they call affordability and pragmatism. Labour says it would decarbonise the power grid by 2030, but has abandoned its original £28 billion a year climate commitment. Liberal Democrats say they'll achieve net zero 5 years ahead of schedule in 2045. The Greens want to reach that target more than a decade early. Reform UK is the outlier, committing to scrapping net zero policy altogether.
Tragically, net zero has become part of a culture war. Everyone knows, the economist knows, the scientist knows, the people in business know that net zero isn't a problem, it's an opportunity.
What's notable about this march, beyond its sheer size, is the range of organisations being represented here, from groups with membership cards in kitchen drawers and glove boxes around the country to direct action groups like Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. The unifying factor, a desire to see environment and climate higher up the electoral agenda.
Like we've never loved before.
That reflects recent polling putting climate in the top 5 of voters' concerns, albeit a considerable distance behind the cost of living, health, the economy and immigration. The message, though, coming from Parliament Square today, whichever party is voted into power 12 days from now, time is running out for it to act on the environment.
Well, earlier I spoke to the polling expert, Sir John Curtis, and asked him why climate change isn't getting much traction in this election.
Well, I think so far as the Conservatives are concerned, having, as it were, leaned against some of the net zero proposals and loosened somewhat the requirements so far as heating and cars are concerned, but then discovering that this didn't seem particularly to do anything to improve their position in the polls, I think perhaps they've concluded that this wasn't necessarily an issue that was going to work for them. Meanwhile, Labour, of course, have reined in their ambition so far as public spending on so-called green investment is concerned. I think they, like any UK government, is going to be primarily reliant on the private sector so far as delivering net zero is concerned. So that, to that extent, at least, neither party really has a great deal to say about it.
I've just been looking at a YouGov poll that said that for young people 18 to 24 years old, the climate is their top priority for 20% of people. I mean, does this tell us that this has been an election campaign fought largely around issues that matter more to older people?
No, actually, all the evidence when you ask people, how concerned are you about climate change, both data from Ipsos, data from YouGov, data work done for the Department for Net Zero, that all of those surveys tend to find that it is actually older people who are somewhat more likely to say they are concerned about climate change than younger people. I'm afraid the image that you get, because it's young people who tend to be on the streets, is perhaps a more reflection of the fact that younger people are more likely to be on the streets about any issue. Actually, concern about climate change is very widespread across our society, although we do not all necessarily agree, and this is the crucial point, we do not necessarily agree about what is the best way of trying to deal with it. I'm not immediately acquainted with the poll that you cite, but I'm certainly aware of plenty of other polls that suggest that for the most part, it is the economy, it is the cost of living, it is the state of the health service that are the principal preoccupations that people say that they have.
And it's an election in which the Conservatives seem incredibly preoccupied with trying to stop their supporters from voting for Nigel Farage and reform. Now, in that light, do you think that Mr. Farage's comments saying that the West provoked Russia's invasion of Ukraine will have any effect at all on voters switching from Conservative to Reform?
Well, they might. I mean, certainly this is the first time that the Conservative Party has felt able to actually criticise what Nigel Farage and Reform was saying, as opposed to saying to voters, if you vote for Mr. Farage, you'll get to Keir Starmer. And some of us suspect the Conservative Party should have been doing this quite a long time ago, given the extent to which Reform are taking votes off them. It's over 1 in 4 2019 Conservative voters who are currently saying that they are backing Reform. It's something he said well before, but maybe not so many people were aware of it. Well, we'll wait and see. I think it's always been the case with Mr. Farage. He clearly is the most charismatic and most effective campaigner in this election, but he's also the one who is most at risk of saying something that also puts people off.
There's been a lot of headlines, hasn't there, in this election about these super polls that look at the possible results in individual constituencies. One of them has Rishi Sunak even potentially losing his seat. Do you think people are reading too much into some of these?
Well, they're reading too much, and you certainly shouldn't be relying on these polls to tell you what's going to go on in individual constituencies. That is pushing them too far, although that is the way that journalists are inclined to report them. What you should be using them for is to as evidence as to how the geography of party support more broadly across sets of constituencies looks as though it's going to change. And what all of these polls show, that support for the Conservatives is falling more heavily in constituencies that the party is trying to defend.
There's a huge variation, isn't there, in these super polls? Some of them have the Tories on just 53 seats after the election. Others have them on as many as 160 something. Does that make this a particularly difficult election, do you think, to call?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's most difficult about this election, and where the uncertainty is probably going to last all the way through unless there's a dramatic turnaround, is just how bad the defeat for the Conservatives will be. There is, frankly, debate amongst pollsters about whether the methods that we are using are going to prove to be robust enough for these seats estimations, given that, and again, what one needs to realise, we are in unprecedented territory. We have not had a party in post-war British politics down by 25 points in the polls. And this does make it much more difficult to anticipate just what the geographical distribution of that drop is going to be.
The fact that Rishi Sunak appears to be visiting Tory seats with quite significant majorities, safe seats, what does that tell you about the Conservative strategy in the final couple of weeks of this campaign?
Well, certainly you want to focus your resources on where a local campaign might make a difference. And it's long been obvious that where the Tories should be focusing their efforts is, broadly speaking, constituencies where their majorities of the order of between 30 and 35 points, i.e. deeply, deeply into Tory territory.
Okay, Professor Sir John Curtice, thank you very much for speaking with us.
You're welcome.